Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
I mean,
So we had finished Acharei Mot. This week's Sedra is Acharei Mot Kedoshim, but we had not finished the Rashis on Kedoshim, and so that's what we're picking up right now. So this part of it talks basically, I think the overall theme is that these were practices of the Canaanites, and that God is saying to the Israelites, if you start to do the same thing, if you start to practice the way the Canaanites practiced, you're not going to last long on the land either. That there's, when Micah, I think Micah is the one who says there are three things that the Lord requires of you, right? To do justice, to love mercy, and to walk modestly. Hatznea lechet, to walk modestly before the Lord. And in many of these, I believe, have to do with walking modestly before God. In other words, taking that general statement and trying to make sense of what is the specifics of walking modestly. So, so here we're talking about, it says here, right? V'hanefesh asher tifne el ha'ovot, and the soul, meaning the individual, who turns to ghosts, avot, or ovot, excuse me, ovot, ve'el hayid onim, right? And the familiar spirits. Excuse me 1 second. Sorry. Okay, liznot acharehem, to run after them. So liznot is sometimes understood as meaning to stray, to stray. Vanatati et panai, I shall set my face by nefesh against that person, against that individual. Vehichrati oto, and I will cut him off, mikerev amo, from the midst of his people. So obviously, these are very tough statements. They really are tough. And sometimes the fact that they're so tough, just pushes our backs up uh, because they're not pleasant to listen to. And yet I think that at least what the Torah is trying to do for sure is to tell us, these may not be things that we think are very serious, right? We may think they're not big deals, and yet in some sense they are a big deal. And trying to consult the dead is not acting modestly. So I think, is an example of not acting modestly. Let's see if we have any. I don't think we do have any Rashi on this, but I'll double check. Let's see. He's this word has come come about in a previous parsha, and that's why Rashi isn't talking about them. He actually describes what exactly a yidoni, what that is exactly, and he talks about trying to, that these are basically mediums that speak in different ways, etc. We have, in fact, in a previous session, read the Rashis on these. So, going on to the next verse. Vehit kadishtem, you shall sanctify yourselves. And I think what it's saying is, to look at your life, a person should look at their lives and see that there's a nobility about them, that every person has this built-in nobility and to act in that particular way. Because we know that the higher up on the social ladder that you are, ideally, you're supposed to act with more responsibility and more a sense of not just doing what you want to do, but knowing that you have a social, right, a responsibility on a social level because of the level of influence you have on society. So let's see. Vehit kadishtem, right? You shall. And by the way, that has a sense of to separate yourselves, right? To distinguish yourselves. And Rashi says, Zo prishut avodat elilim. He says this has to do with getting away from removing yourself from idolatry. turning away from any kind of idolatry. Ushmartem et chukotai, and you shall guard my statutes. And a chok we understand to mean an arbitrary rule, that those arbitrary rules are there, that because they are able to, by performing arbitrary rules, it's a way of loving God, of demonstrating one's love of the divine, because there is not necessarily any rational reason to do these things. And
Rabbi,
yes, yes,
you didn't finish this sentence. You did. The Rashi was on the first word, but
okay, right. Thank you. Yes, let me do that. Thanks, Lauren. So you shall sanctify yourselves, v'hiyitem kedoshim, and you shall be kadosh. You shall be distinguished, right? Ki ani Hashem Elokechem, for I, the Lord, am your Elohim. I am your Lord. Thank you, Lauren. Ushmartem et chukotai. So as I said, you shall guard my statutes, and you shall perform them. Asitem otam. Ani Adonai mekadishchem. I am the Lord who sanctifies you, who makes you distinguished. Right. And another understanding of this word kadosh, which I've only sort of understood relatively recently, is significant. Significant. And of course, you've heard me say that I think that every human being seeks some level of significance, because it's another way of saying, why am I here in this world? What purpose do I have as a human being in this world? What's my relationship to the rest of the universe? And that's what this does. It sets us up with that awareness and that ability. And it takes not just belief, it takes action as well. We're on both levels. Thought and action. Ki ish, for any man, asher yekalel et aviv ve'et imo, who curses his father and his mother, mot yumat, he shall be put to death. Again, one of those statements that's trying to say, very often these are things, unfortunately, that people tend to do because they think, I think the term is venial, right? If I'm not mistaken, they don't think they're that big a deal, right? So it's not that you want courts putting people to death, but you want to understand that this is a very serious thing. Aviv ve'imo kilel, and so it repeats this, and Rashi's going to comment on the fact that it repeats. Why does it repeat? His father and his mother he has cursed, damav bo, his blood is upon him, meaning it's another way of saying that he is deserving of a capital punishment. So here we go. Aviv ve'imo kilel, he has cursed his father and his mother. So Torah Kohanim, right? The Sifra, Sanhedrin Pei, or on the tractate Sanhedrin on page 85. Lirabot, this is to include Lachar Mita, after they have passed away. In other words, it's not just a matter of cursing them while they are alive, but even cursing their memory, cursing them, the memory of them would be included in something very significant. And that's sort of, again, I've come to the conclusion that the Torah is in fact a manual, you might say, to achieve immortality. And this is one of those little suggestions that if it's still significant to that you are cursing them, even though they're no longer around, that maybe it's a little intimation. Although I'd never claim it's compelling, but I just think it's just an interesting way of understanding this. Damavbo, his blood is upon him. Zoskila. So specifically, when it says this, there is actually a punishment which is stoning, right? Skila is stoning. There are four types of capital punishments, right? There's decapitation. That's, in other words, the sword, guillotine, whatever, right? There's chenek, which is strangulation. There's sreifa, which is by fire, and skila, which is by stoning. They all, again, I've mentioned this more than once, but when you actually read about how these things were performed, you realize that they were instantaneous. There was not supposed to be any prolonged suffering associated with these. And it's not like being stoned wasn't standing and having people pelt you with stones. It wasn't that at all. So without going into that now, it was still instantaneous. V'chein, and he says, Kol makom shene'emar damav bo, right? In every place where it mentions this punishment, saying his blood is upon him, or demehem bam, or their blood is upon them. V'lamadnu me'ov v'yidoni. We learn this from the law regarding the ghost and the familiar spirit because there shene'emar bahem, because there it says, ba'evan yirgamu otam, with a stone they shall stone them. Okay, demehem bam, and it continues with the word demehem bam, their blood is upon them. So whenever the Torah mentions demehem bam regarding some kind of capital offense, we know that the actual punishment is stoning. Upshuto, and the simple meaning of Shel Mikra of the verse, Kamo Damav Barosho or Damo Barasho. It's as if to say that his blood is on his head. Ein ne'emash, that is, one is not the person who performs the executioner. In ein ne'enash al mitato, there is no punishment for his death. So, in other words, the executioner is not held guilty of taking the life, because we'll see Ella, however, who he is the one who committed the offense. Shehu garam la'atzmo sheyehareg, because he caused himself to be killed. He is responsible for his own death. That's simply being carried out, but he is responsible for it. Ve'ish asher yinaf et eshet ish, and a man who commits adultery with the wife of a man. Asher yinaf et eshet re'ehu, he who commits adultery with the wife of his neighbor or of his friend, right? Mot yumat, he shall be surely put to death. Hanoef v'hanoef noafet, both the one who commits adultery, both the man and the woman who consented to commit adultery. So again, it's not that we necessarily want to run around filling the courts with adulterers, okay, and going through that process. But again, I think I would understand it contextually now as saying these are important things. And sadly, I don't think adultery is that rare. Mike, welcome. Go ahead.
Hello. So what did you mean by immortality? Is that physical immortality or
No, so there's
mortality?
the rabbis talk about olam haba, the world to come. It actually has more than one understanding. So I think the best way it's sometimes described is the world of souls. In other words, I think that's another way of saying that we would experience consciousness, but not in a physical way, that we would have a sense of consciousness. There are, in fact, descriptions of this level of living. There are beliefs within Judaism of resurrection. No question about that. That's suggested in the Bible itself. But they also, prior to that, because resurrection is still something that is to happen in the future, the idea of a world of souls, that after you no longer are in this world, you actually exist. Your consciousness is there on another disembodied state. Did you
Okay,
want
so first of all,
to jump in?
not physical immortality,
Correct.
uh,
No.
and second, it's an immortality that is somewhere else, not here.
Right. It's on a whole different plane, right? I mean, to say here, is using a spatial concept, and this is not a spatial, this has nothing to do with physical space. It's not measurable in that kind of sense, right? It's perhaps the closest is to say it's the world of your thoughts. right, might be a way to describe it, or a world of your dreams that does not occupy any physical space per se. It's on a whole different level. But again, as I said, there are some traditional works that describe this sort of thing. But I would also say though that it does also add to one's life here too. That and not necessarily in every single case, but by and large, I think it adds to your years because I think it's for the most part it gives you healthy choices and puts you emotionally in a good place in terms of looking into yourself, trying to discover how to be as honest with yourself as you can, and also being compassionate to others, being fair and compassionate. I think those are all things that tend to, lengthen a person's life, and that you're not bearing a lot of hatred inside your heart. And that's not to say that there are people who are that way who live a long time, but I would say just in general, it adds a lot of quality to your life. Okay. So let's take a look at this verse right now. So it says ish asher, right? So, and a man, right? Pratla katan. So we're analyzing this carefully, this verse, to understand how to actually apply it, right? So it says this would exclude a minor. So when it says an ish, the implication is that it's an adult. So minors are not going to be punished for committing adultery. Okay. So exactly, where that goes is interesting. I mean, we're saying bar mitzvah would be the distinction between a minor and an adult, at least for a man, it's 13. For a woman, generally, it's 12 and a half, right? But it's saying it is not an adult infraction, right? Hopefully one would hope that perhaps there's a way for them to learn their lessons. Asher Yinafit Eshet Ish, who commits adultery with the wife of a man, and here again, Ish, right? It's the woman, literally the woman of a man. And again, if Ish means an adult, and this analysis is found in the tractate Kiddushin on page 19, or Sanhedrin, page 52, Prat le'eshet katan. So again, that would be to exclude the wife of a minor. Lamadnu, and so consequently we can infer she'ein lekatan kiddushin, that the legal status of marriage does not apply to a minor. Does not apply to a minor. So again, we're not looking to try to expand the number of capital cases that we have. And it doesn't mean that one is not responsible. It's just that it's not viewed in quite the same way as it is for an adult. Well, ezo eshet ish chayavti lecha, and regarding which married woman am I holding you responsible? Asher in af et eshet rehu. This has to do with committing adultery with the wife of his Rhea, of his companion. So again, companion, how do we understand this? Prat la'eshet oved gedilim. So that means it excludes the wife of an idolater. In other words, committing adultery with the wife of an adulterer, of a wife of an idolater, does not bear with it the capital punishment. Does that mean it's okay? No, it doesn't. Not at all. The issue has to do with the severity of the infraction. So again, it really bears meditation and thought as to why the distinction is made. Lamadnu, and we learn from this, we can infer from this, she'ein kiddushin le'ovdei gilulim, that idolaters do not have their marriages do not have the legal status of a marriage within Judaism for an idolater. So my sense is that I would not, again, I want to be very careful about what I understand as an idolater. And I don't feel there are that many idolaters around anymore. Either that, right? Because I cannot consider Christians or Muslims to be idolaters in any sense of the word. I do not, from what I can understand of Buddhism and some of the Eastern religions, that they involve idolatry per se, right? Idolatry has to do with the putting something, some object, as your source of salvation, of comfort, of strength, etc., of success. And so either we are very much limiting the number of potential idolaters in the world, or you can go in the other direction, which is to say, if you worship money, and there are people who worship money. That's what they want. They feel that money is what's going to solve all their problems and going to give them every success and guarantee them happiness and all these kinds of things. And again, I want to be careful. I'm not looking to set up things, but I suppose that would mean again, that we're not looking for capital cases. Right. So anyway, just some thoughts regard this because this is in fact challenging material for sure. So Mot yumat hanoef hanoefet, right? Honoafet in pause. So the idolater, the adulterer, forgive me, the words are so similar. The adulterer and the one with whom the adultery is being committed shall be surely put to death. Okay. Kol mita ha'amura mitura, right? So in this case, you didn't say demei hembam. You did not see that phrase associated with this capital punishment. And he says that there's a general rule that whenever it talks about mut, right? Whenever it talks about a capital offense and that there needs to be a death penalty, right? If it doesn't mention any specific way in which the death penalty is to be carried out, eino elachenek. We are talking here about strangulation. That's the kind of death penalty that we're talking about. And again, I just want to totally emphasize that I believe this has to do more with level of concern than trying to actually carry out these punishments. At least that's how I choose to understand the Torah here. It's getting our attention. The ish asher yishkav, and a man who lies at eshet aviv, who lies with his father's wife, right? Ervat aviv gila. He has exposed the nakedness of his father. Mot yumtu, right? Shnehem, the two of them, that is the wife of the father, the mother-in-law, and the man, shall be put to death. To mayhem bum, their blood is upon their heads. So here we have the mayhem bum again, and so we know that the punishment actually is stoning. Yes, Judith. Hi. I can't hear you yet.
Could you just compare strangling versus stoning as the default method of execution?
Okay, so as I recollect, because I did study tractates on Hedron, and essentially when they would execute some, the way they would strangle a person is that they would take a cloth. In fact, they would take maybe a cord and wrap that around a cloth. They put a soft cloth around the person's neck. They take the cord or wrap it around that cloth, and then the witnesses who were accusing that person of whatever crime they were accusing him of would have to pull the cord very hard and strangle that person. And the idea is that that person would lose consciousness immediately. Okay. That was the first part of every capital execution. And then they would do whatever it was necessary regarding anything beyond that. In other words, the decapitation would take place after that person had lost consciousness. Burning was actually pouring hot lead down the person's mouth, I think. That was burning, that they were burned from the inside. And again, they weren't conscious when this happened. They could not be conscious. They were essentially deceased at any rate, or certainly at that point. And stoning is they would throw this person off like a 20-foot cliff, and then they would drop a big stone on top of them. So none of these things are attractive, but you should understand that the idea of prolonging the death was absolutely counter to this. The idea is that one was taking them out of their life as quickly as possible. Is that answering your question, Judith? Did you want to add anything or?
Sorry. Yes, that answers it. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. And this may be a good place for us to stop here for today. So I'm going to put this here, right here. So again, essentially, I said these were examples of modest trying to act modestly, that it was so important for us to act modestly as human beings. So, any other thoughts before we end the recording?